So welcome everyone. This is the moment I'm sure you've all been waiting for, where we hear from the senior leadership of the CSD industry in Europe, and we can reflect upon the themes of today. And we've made a late change to the title of this presentation, this discussion. It's not Post-trade 2030, but Post-trade post-2030, because it occurred to us that 2030 is only 5 years away. We probably needed a bit more vision than that. So without further ado, let me introduce the panel. Dimitri Patin of the ECB, who is the new T2S boss in effect. So, but was formerly of this parish. He's a CSD guy in his heart, and we will need to make sure he stays that way. Olga Jordao, CEO of Euronext in Porto, deputy chair of ECSDA, and I'm very proud to say started her professional career in Luxembourg with State Street, so she can be relied upon for a truly understanding approach. You spent most of your career in the industry, so not in the CSD at all, so we'll benefit from that. Peter Schners, who is CEO of Euroclear, and but by far his most attractive characteristic is that he was once the chief risk officer of Euroclear Group, and surely a much more challenging task than merely being CEO. So we'll hear a lot from Peter. Now, Sam needs no introduction from me. He heads up all of security services within the Deutsche Börse Group, so heading up all of the Clearstream CSDs, and therefore, our big boss. And so I'll have to be nice to you, Sam. And Javier Hernani, who is the CEO of BME, but also heads up for the combined BME 6 group, the Securities Services Division, and Javier has been in this industry for longer than many of you have been working, and is going to certainly give us the benefit of having seen it all before. So my first question, and the way we're going to do this, we're going to look at context. We're going to then go back over many of the themes that we've touched on in the panels today, but to take a helicopter view and to try and take the very long view. So my first question for you is, we have the good, the bad, and the ugly. So what is good? What are the key opportunities for the CSD industry in Europe? What's good about our starting position? I mean, Javier.
Thank you. In 2030, I will not be here, according to your introduction.
Well, neither will I.
Anyway, no, I think the title of the panel is very good. I think it's going to be very difficult for any one of us to say anything new after so many senior panelists before with so much content. I will take a couple of views on the topic. First of all, I think we do our job very well in this moment. I think we have a lot to improve, but I think the network of CSDs in Europe is really resilient, is very strong, and really delivers, I think, a very high quality of service. That I know we need to talk about the future, but I think this is the reality today, with many things to improve. What are the opportunities? I think opportunities are behind service, as always. Service is a function of technology to a large extent, so we're just beginning to see the impact of the new technologies into our business. We're all conducting proofs of concept on AI, on digital, so on and so forth. So I think this is clearly the big impact beyond 2030. No? I think that 27, to be very honest and very frank, I think the resources that we all have, big or small, are limited. So to do enormous transformations before T+1 is introduced in Europe, I think is just not realistic. So most of us will be absolutely focusing to making that happen. Another thing is that whether or not that's the right priority, but that's too late to discuss that. So until 27, we will all be absolutely focused into that and doing our biggest efforts into that. And probably the rest of innovations and new things will be at a later stage, because I don't see unlimited resources to go into everything we want to do, even in the transformation of technology.
So, opportunity cost of T+1 in effect. Sam, what do you see as our strengths and our opportunities?
I'll be a little bit more controversial in as much as I think we run the risk in Europe. So I agree with Javier. I think we've done a lot of work over the last 5, 10, 15 years in Europe in terms of connecting interoperability, consolidation, right? I mean, if you look at realistically at the 4 big parties here on the stage that we have, we represent 95% of the settlements across Europe, right, on a day-to-day basis. So consolidated we are to a certain degree already, right? But I think we do run the risk, if we focus just on T+1, we will throw away everything that we've developed so well over the last few years, in particularly in the last couple of years, when we talk about digital assets. We've seen that with the CBDC trials, very successful across the board. We have regulation in Europe. No other jurisdiction in the world has regulation, but we have regulation in Europe. Right, you're going to see a 180-degree change in the whole world around crypto in the US in the next 18 months or even less, right? And we have an opportunity to embrace that. And I think the digital aspect of our business, we really need to embrace it in Europe. Otherwise, we're going to lose at that as well.
Thank you. Peter.
Well, I think that we are somewhere in a kind of a unique environment today, because I've never been circulating so many papers that are talking about our destiny. So, and they're all saying like you should go to more consolidation and everything else. I think they are overlooking indeed what we said before, the size that we already have that Sam referred to, and also in previous discussions, the linkage we have with the rest of the world already. And I want to stress what we need is value creation. That comes from growth. And how you go for growth is not limited only to within Europe, but also outside of Europe. And I think that what the future can bring, if we do it well, is not to focus too much on keeping the status quo, things that help us to keep the status quo, because the fish on the table is vested interests. Now, let's be very clear. The momentum is, for us, how can we go above this, and how can we make sure that we capture that growth, that we continue to deliver the value that we've been able to deliver in the past. And that is unique, not only because there is this discussion and everybody's talking about this, because, I mean, 10, 15 years ago, we were the plumbers. Now, suddenly, we may be the solution, but somewhere the reality is in the middle, I think. But we should do something now, which is a step up, which says, like, what are we going to be doing differently in Europe to be successful? And there, I think that we are part of that story, and we're an important part of that story.
That's great. So we have a digital destiny, and the CSD is part of the future. Do you agree with that, Olga?
Yeah, very much so. You mentioned that I started my career at State Street, and I remember the days when T2S came about and we were saying CSDs are going to disappear. No CSDs anymore, we're going to connect directly. Didn't happen, so we're still here. And I think the key opportunity today is to stay relevant, to have a voice, and all the nice things that we spoke about all day, simplification and harmonization and everything else. But it's more about being in the leadership role, being not just a solution, but actually driving the solution. It's about designing this solution, not just another report, another study. You know, these things we know how to do well, but actually being in the driver's seat, I think that's really, really important for us, because in the end, our number one goal for all of us is growth in Europe. And so everything we do needs to be targeted to that. And let's face it, the investors, they don't care about us, they don't know us. So it's, in the end, it's difficult to be relevant in an environment where what we actually want to achieve, they don't know us. So I think that's a key challenge. Investors care about ease of investing, they care about costs, and there we can really play a role and be relevant.
Thank you, Olga. Now, Dimitri, you're no longer with CSD, but
yeah, coming last, it's a bit difficult to add much. Basically, the point is, I think we've heard it 20 times today already. The capital markets in Europe is underdeveloped, so it means that the size of it is not. I mean, is smaller than the global economic power of Europe. And one of the problems, I did not see that brought too often today, but the gap is widening. Actually, it's not that we are just in a status quo. I just heard that the team gave me some statistics. 15 years ago, the size of the US capital market was 2 to 2.5 the size of Europe. Today, or last year, it's 4 times bigger. So it's not that we are shrinking, but we are not growing at the pace of the others. So it means that we need to do better. And that would be, if the question is what is the opportunity, it's always better to be in a market where there is opportunity for growth, basically. Now, an opportunity is an opportunity. You can decide to leave it there, and you can decide to seize it. And the real question, I'm sure we will get back to that today in our discussion, is what do we need to do to seize this growth? And sorry to say, I mean, some will tell you, well, it's a bit normal because in Europe you have more small and medium-sized businesses, so it's normal that they go to their banks and not go to capital markets. Well, that's true partially, but the elephant in the room, and sorry to say that, is also the fragmentation that we have. We may say it's not relevant, it's not important, but we have as many infrastructures today as CSDs, and that has a cost. And so that's something that we can just not deny. I barely dare to make the joke. I said I had 3 figures, 40, 10, and 30. And it's not the measurement of a top model. It's just the number of stock exchanges that we have, CCPs and CSDs in Europe. And actually the figures are not, I heard different figures in today. And that in itself is a sign. We don't even know. I mean, from I don't know if it's 28. I read 33 in another paper. So, in itself, that's telling us something. No? So from my perspective, we need to work on 2 fronts. Actually, one is find the means to reduce this fragmentation. And don't get me wrong, you said it twice already, Mark. I know where I'm born. I used to be a CSD boy a while ago. And I know and I've witnessed that CSDs try hard to consolidate. If we talk several times about the 4 groups that we have here that are actually, what is it, 95% of the markets, they manage to get to a certain level of consolidation. So at technical level, that's done. Operational level, that's done. But they never, even in the best case, they never managed to become one CSD with one presence in the markets, and we would need to see how. I mean, that's not something that the CSDs will solve themselves. I believe that's the markets will solve that. I mean, if there is a possibility in other businesses, if there is a room for merging, that happens. It happens. Here we have barriers that make that this is just impossible. We have tried hard and this is not impossible. The second angle, but I can keep that for a later question, is we should not hide behind that. There is still a lot of things that we can do as an industry to improve, and we've been talking many times about how T2S is used. I think we can use it much better than we do today. We have the machine, we just don't know where is the second gear. Yeah, we have to work on how to use T2S better, and we have to work also maybe harder, because there is a lot of work done, harder on harmonization.
And that's a couple of very interesting points that brings us on to the vulnerabilities and the threats in many ways, Dimitri. You mentioned the deficits and the growing gap to the United States, and Sam, you touched on this too with crypto and so forth, and that gap is liable to widen, at least in the shorter term. How much difference does that sudden shift in geopolitics, in particularly with looking at the incoming US administration, how much does that move the dial in European priorities, in view of the panel? Peter.
Well, I think we all heard about strategic autonomy and everything that goes with it. And we also know, like, if you look at the incoming president in the US, we know a bit about the tactics and we're reading more every day, but it will not be about multilateral agreements. It will be about bilateral agreements. It's a deal maker, so it's a quid pro quo. What can you give me so I can give something to you? It will be hard. It will be showing who's the strongest. And I think that in Europe, the risk that we have is that we're being played apart. So again, EU here will have to show that we are a union, that we are somewhere defending together, and that we should talk, either have our strongest person talking to Mr. Trump in this situation, or we will have to make sure that he talks to everybody together, but not what happened the last presidency. So we know more or less what we can expect, and we see all the other arrangements that have been taken. So for Europe, that means that we're more on our own. And so I'm coming back to the growth that we all refer to. Where is this growth coming from? We have to reposition vis-a-vis the rest of the world. That is clearly one. But at the end of the day, it always goes back to the economic fundamentals. Whatever you do, it needs to create more value than somebody else creates. And that's where you can make the difference. And then once you do this, so your industrial plan and everything else, or your technology plan, which today is as important as this, and not even, if not more important even, then how do I translate this into the next level, and how do I make sure that I have a sustainable, that word is very important, a sustainable economy, whereby I also make sure that it's good to live in, and I can create, not only for the people, but also for the companies, that kind of safety, transparency, sustainability. So I think these are the new things. And so for me, the biggest risk is technology is in the US. If you look at the big seven, they are in the US. So how can we build the equivalent? How are we going to deal with cloud technology? So that technological one, but also that at the level of European Union, but also with other countries close to us. I'm talking about the UK, I'm talking about Norway, I'm talking about Switzerland, which we're also in the discussion today, to make sure that we have the critical mass to have an answer and to make a difference.
If I just add, Mark, I do think we've got the situation whereby through CMU, new European Commission, Capital Markets Union focus, a revived focus on regulation in the capital markets. With Trump coming in, that's going to need to put that on steroids a little bit, right? Because the reality is that that will be one force that will be used. And you talk a little bit about competition, but regulation being used as a competition tool as well will happen. And given that we're already on the back foot to a certain degree in Europe in many aspects of consistency, open access for investors, transparency in terms of tax regulation and so on, we need to do some stuff quickly, right? And there are obviously things that we can do at the CSDs, and we'll touch upon those things, but there is real need for urgency around some of the harmonization of certain aspects of regulation in Europe.
And that doesn't sound like T+1 would then be our top priority, everyone. But Javier, I mean, you've actually also performed successfully a cross-border merger that was not prohibited. So what's your view on how quickly European attitudes need to change to achieve rapid transformation?
I think a number of things to say. First of all, let me take back this US question. The US is winning the narrative. And let me take a step backwards so we don't talk only about settlement. If we look at the European market, and I've spent half of my life at least in the equity markets, talking to issuers and trying to convince them to list in Europe, the US is losing the narrative, is winning the narrative. And the narrative is not based on CSDs. Our part of the cake is that we need to do things better. I totally agree. But the narrative, I mean, I've never encountered a single issuer that told me, I don't like the way Iberclear does the settlement. They don't even know what Iberclear is until the moment in which they come to us and they come with the notary papers and everything else. And then they realize, Iberclear is here. What is this thing of the CSD? So issuers, and I think you all know that issuers are not looking into this. The narrative and some of the big guys behind it are pushing the business towards the US for other reasons that I'm not now going to discuss. I think it's for another debate. So the real reason why we're losing this is not because how we are organized in post-trade. Again, I'm not saying we don't need to do things, but this is not the reason. And I'm very surprised about all this. By the way, every time there's a big change in the European law, Andrea, there's always an Italian report before. It's Thomas Schioppa, Cecchini, Giovannini, and now Letta and Draghi. No? So there are two. Having said that, to me, it's a call for action, isn't it? It's a call for action to say what you guys can do about this, about fragmentation in CCPs and CSDs. In my opinion, it's not a fair debate because fragmentation is there, I agree. Can we do better? We can. But the real reason why we are fragmented is not because of so many things. It's because we have harmonization to be done. It's because we already 20 years of MiFID I. 20 years of MiFID I, MiFID I, MiFID II, MiFID III, Fast and Furious 4, Rambo 5, EMIR, CSD. How many regulation on FMIs? How much regulation on FMIs? Tons of regulation. And how much on harmonization of tax? Zero. How much regulation on corporate law? Zero. Can we just please do a priority list saying, why don't we first try to oil the system, do processes all over Europe in the right way, so we have CSD to CSD in T2S, the right connection, the same processes. So we do a tax reclaim in every country in the same way. So we have exactly the same processes for all over Europe, and we make T2S work really as a CSD to CSD network that is really oiled. And when we do that, which by the way, this is the only thing I think we could do till 27, no? In the same way of T+1, is to get to that, and then if this system doesn't work, we talk about fragmentation. But in my opinion, the bad thing of the Draghi and Letta report is that we are putting first the focus on what politically is very clear, fragmentation. What politically is very difficult is to really put the boots on and go into the issues that we are talking the whole day today. And where is the initiative there? What is the real initiative politically from a legal perspective to harmonize all these things? Nowhere. It's in the Draghi report, I know. But let's not be dragged into the debate of fragmentation before we solve the real things that are not being solved at this moment. Sorry, I'm very passionate about this thing.
No, and I would fully agree, but I do think, and it's probably everybody in this room's job to make sure that our friends in the European Commission and further afield, in fact, understand some of these difficulties and the practical implications of some of the legislation that has been imposed or has been imposed, and the hurdles it puts in the capital markets in terms of efficiency, competitiveness, and all of these aspects. Because otherwise, I think there is a lack of understanding, and I think that's a very general statement I'm making, I know, but when I talk to some individuals, I'm always amazed a little bit that we need some more education. And I think that will help. It doesn't solve the problem, but it is a little bit of our job, I think. And I think all of us collectively, I would say, have taken that as upon us, but I think that we need the whole of this room to really push behind that, because we're all saying the same things.
Yeah, absolutely, Sam. And the whole of this room brings me on to a next question, which
Mark, maybe if I may just, because
Sure.
maybe I was misunderstood. I mean, when I say fragmentation, it's probably a symptom of a problem, and the problem is not the fragmentation. The problem is that there are barriers that prevent, the usual market forces to make sure that we are getting organized properly. So I did not want to be misunderstood on that point. The second comment as well, we have to be mindful of who we are. We are only post-trade. And you say the problem is at the level of the listing. You don't get much if the listing is taking place somewhere else. And to come back to your point, Mark, what would the geopolitics change into what we have to do? I don't believe it should change much of the menu, but it should change the timeline for it. Yep. It should mean that we need to we go through the menu much quicker than before.
And therefore we need to prioritize the menu. So this, for many in the room, and I'd like to pick up on that, Sam, because many CSDs in Europe are relatively small and also very nationally focused. So, Olga, Euronext Portugal, which until recently was one of those CSDs, how do you see in this journey, what is the role of the smaller CSDs? Should they just disappear? How do we deal with that issue? I mean, the barking here. Dogs, as Dimitri's predecessor once called them.
Yes, you're right. So Euronext Securities Porto, which was previously Interbolsa, was until a few years ago the only CSD in the Euronext group. Now there are more CSDs. We're now 4 CSDs in the group, and we as a small CSD now enjoy the benefits of being part of a large group, and that's definitely something very, very positive. Looking at it. Looking at the problem as, are there too many CSDs and should the small CSDs disappear? That's obviously very simplistic and definitely, in my view, not the right way to look at it, because there are good reasons why there are CSDs in smaller markets. They are relevant in their market, they're useful in their market, and there's the need for proximity as well in the market. I need to be close to the issuers. They don't know us, but then when they get to know us, they have many, many questions, and we can be really useful to them. So I think looking at it from the point of view of the number, I think we all agree is not the right way of looking at it, and having this fantasy that maybe a DTCC for Europe would be the right answer. I think it's a fantasy. It wouldn't even be necessarily cheaper, I think, if the cost is a problem, because in the end. I mean, there's no magic recipe about this, and just to maybe on the consolidation, because that leads us to the topic of consolidation, and we've brought it up in a few panels. Looking at it also through the lens of the assets under custody and the fact that our groups here, when we bring them together, have 95% of the market. That's not consolidation, in my view. That is concentration. We all our groups, we have done M&A. You do M&A, you consolidate the ownership. That doesn't mean that you actually consolidate your platforms, your operating models, that you converge, which is what's really important to make the whole value chain more simple, more easier. So it really depends. Once a group decides to buy a CSD or a business in general, what do you do with it? Do you let it live its own life, which is what happened to Euronext Securities Porto for a long time, because we were the only one. But then when you have more in the group, then you actually have almost a duty to bring them together for the efficiencies, but it doesn't happen all the time. It's not automatic. And even when you try to bring them together, to converge your operating model, converge your platforms, you still have hurdles there. I'm also the head of operations for the 4 CSDs of the group. Now, if I want to have my teams working together and sharing work, I need to file for I need to get approvals, and I actually have to treat this like an outsourcing to a third party. And it's within the group, so we also need something to happen there if we're talking about things that could make the flows easier, because otherwise you can't, I mean, consolidate or defragment. I would even say defragment, more converge rather than consolidate, because consolidating it to one is not the solution in my view.
And that's super hard, especially given the provisions of CSDR, Olga.
Yeah, exactly.
But Peter, turning to you now, could you consolidate, picking up on Olga's distinction between capital consolidation and process convergence? Can you achieve process consolidation, the same effects, without capital consolidation?
I think there are different combinations, and I think it's a bit a fallacy of keeping a CSD in each entity as if there is no other solution. I think we can look at different solutions. We tried with ESIS to bring together the three markets, one platform. We're stuck with the legal entities. Yeah, that's where it is, and those discussions have taken place, but the momentum is not there to step to the next level. It could be like the Irish model, whereby you just integrate the CSD in your ICSD, and that's a cheap model, and that creates immediately the economies of scale and the interoperability between those different markets and everything else. And there is the collaboration with European products we have today. We talked before about Eurobonds. It's a 13 trillion market, 13 trillion, and it is international in so many currencies. And it's bringing investments within Europe, and it's Europe investing outside of Europe. So these products, we have them. I mean, the US is jealous that we're having these products, yeah? That we're so successfully using them, and they're using this actively. Yeah? So why are we not leveraging that more? So I think that kind of creativity, and then also the outsourcing that you indeed have within a group at a certain moment. Yes, there is CSDR, but it is also belong to a group and having responsibility at the level of the group. And that is quite difficult under the CSDR arrangements. And if we are focusing on this one, then it's inward looking. And that's exactly what we should not be doing. We should make sure we have the right regulation. I'm fully in favor of this, and I can tell you CSDR has a lot of good components in there. It's a good regulation. If it were to be principle-based, it would even be better. Yeah? And there are a few things that we like less, and let's face the fact. But overall, it's a very good regulation. It has done well. Yeah? So but the question is like, is it going to help us to go to a next level, or is it going to be another impediment? That's the relevant question.
And
That's
just,
a good
let me
question.
just, don't take me wrong. I was not arguing that different CSDs in the same group should stay separate, because that's definitely not the way we're going, and we really believe in converging the models, the platforms, and going as far as we are allowed to do. That's definitely, and being creative there is absolutely necessary for that.
And maybe just one thing, yeah. It may sound hard, but what I'm worrying about is, and I've been running a mid-sized CSD, because I've been the CEO of the Netherlands too in the past. But if you're a small CSD and you're not part of this, and you find yourself 5 years from now being isolated, what are you then going to do? Because are you going to find the funding to address your legacy? Are you going to be part of, do you find the investments to be competitive? I think that's the real question that small CSDs should ask themselves. There are solutions. You can maybe a niche market, you can at a certain moment proximity, but saying that the other ones are not working on proximity is not correct neither. So you can reach proximity again in different ways. There are different ways to skin a cat, and I think we need to have more flexibility there to do what is the right thing. Yeah.
Can I just add
Sam.
one point about just technology and legal entity structure? So we had NASDAQ earlier, right? One legal vehicle, one platform, right? So I do think, and I know all of these groups are working on the same thing, we certainly are, right, in terms of consolidation as much as possible within the realms of the regulation that allows us, and CSDR refit will help that with the passporting. But the consolidation of technology, right, if you look across what we're doing in Europe at the moment, actually within the CSD institutions, most of us are consolidating our technology to ensure that we have one process, right? And that will help, obviously, our client base. That will help Europe as well. There's no doubt about that. It won't solve some of the regulatory issues that we have around corporate actions and other aspects within securities law that is in the countries, but it will at least help streamline it as best as we possibly can across the marketplace.
So will technology be transformative in its ability to achieve those goals, Sam, in its ability to facilitate process convergence in the very diverse ways that you guys have laid it out? Is there a step change with digitization, or is it simply a question of focusing on the process outcomes irrespective of the tools?
No, but I don't think we can focus individually on process outcomes, because by definition we'll end up going down potentially a couple of different roads, right? So we come back to the topic, and I'll put SWIFT to the side, but a set of standards. And somebody, I think it was also from Euroclear, mentioned about data standards, and I think data standards is an anchoring point that we need to focus on. Mm-hmm. Certainly, we've started that journey and open to expand that journey. Euroclear ourselves and DTCC have put out their set of data standards around digital, and a second innings of that. And I'm sure as we move into next year, we'll continue to expand that across Europe. Again, speaking to the advantage we have in Europe, but also making sure we don't lose sight of our friends across the pond. But data standards are going to be key to driving kind of processes forward, because that's what's going to drive the new technology. It's not about, you talked, Javier, about issuance. Today, when we issue a security, typically we have a 10, 20, 400-page, issuance pamphlet, right, about the security itself. We've taken maybe 6, 7, 8 data points out of that to be able to settle the issuance and settle the transaction. The reality is, what you want at that point is every data element out of that prospectus into the platform, so that right the way through the life cycle of that security, you've got everything you need, and that is distributed across the marketplace within Europe. We have a really good start on that in Europe, I think, and we're starting to align on some of those standards, but the reality is, I think that's the way we'll drive. It's not necessarily the type of technology, but the fundamentals that we'll need to look at.
And that implies standardization. So from where you sit, Dimitri, how important is standardization to that journey? I mean, you have a unique vantage point kind of underneath the CSDs, if you like.
Well, we believe that harmonization is really important. I heard, I think in the previous panel, that sometimes small things make a difference. And I believe, compared to all the work that is done, harmonization is a small thing, but it can make a difference, because we heard again, I think in the previous panel, this topic of ISO 20022. I was happy to see that if there was no T+1, ISO 20022 was the winner. Out of all, basically, and I believe that those small elements and the data dictionary or the data models, I would agree, is also maybe even more relevant, I think. But this is a small thing that can make the difference. Sometimes we lose a lot of time wondering if a change can be made, and it's true that today, with how we work, we are, bound to follow message standards, message layouts, sorry. And then we say, oh no, this one is difficult, just because some want to do it because maybe they are using ISO 20022, but others say, oh no, it's ISO 15022 and we don't see really the value. I heard business case many times and so on. Obviously, when you have more standards to support and so on, the business case for changing something is always more difficult.
Mm-hmm. Very interesting question there. I have a question here, which I'm going to read out, which is, so 95% of the assets basically represented here. So why not bid for the other 5%? Or indeed, Dimitri, why not use your bazooka? Apparently you have a bazooka. So you've got a bazooka. Are you going to use it to take over the rest of us? I guess is that question.
I'm not sure I get the question, to be
You got the question. Anyway, let's move on to regulation, because it is quite clear that the United States, in fueling that growth disparity that you referred to, Dimitri, earlier, one of the key reasons for that is certainly Basel III and the US attitude to Basel III and to consolidation in technology, consolidation in banking and so forth, and in infrastructure in particular. So we focused on what is it that Europe should do. Given the upcoming bonfire of regulation across the Atlantic, shouldn't we be thinking of deregulating? Have you?
Indeed. I think at least, as Jesus Benito pointed out before, I think I would speak on behalf of many people here that what we need at least is a pause. So actually, the tsunami of regulation we've got of FMIs in the whole value chain has been enormous. I'm not sure the US has done the same thing. I mean, they did a huge effort with the Dodd-Frank bill. We know that. But since then, as I mentioned before, I think we've got one piece of regulation after the other. Unfortunately, part of that regulation had to amend significant failures of the previous one. I'm talking about MiFID specifically. I think we need to settle down a little bit what we need to do, at least not impose additional regulation to what already works well. I know this debate is difficult, but I think with all the challenges we have in front of us, T+1 and the others, I think additional regulation is probably not the way to go forward. I fear, honestly, that the Trump administration will go into something that will be completely different. Very difficult to expect or to even analyze now where they will go. But if this creates a competitive advantage together with the existing competitive advantage or narrative we have together, we will face a difficult 5 or 4 years ahead of us.
And we won't produce this growth.
It's difficult it's difficult to know what they will do and how this will actually impact our business. But actually, if we go into kind of a offshore, I don't know, whatever type of thing, we'll probably be impacted as well. So at least from the European perspective, harmonization, I think, is key, absolutely key for everything we want to do in next years. If we really want to have a consolidated post-trade environment. But I will give a pause so that we at least we can make all regulation that is now on the table flow and be totally accomplished, and not another 6 months. I mean, if we take into account obviously also the ECB projects, we will have a full 25, which is already extremely demanding, and going forward. So, at what stage will we give the FMIs a breathing space? I think that's something to be considered.
To give ourselves the chance to harmonize without being. Don't see regulation as the solution. Sam, do you agree with that?
I was just going to flip it to the growth topic, right? I mean, we touched on this growth topic, and I think that's just so important because it's that, Phil said it earlier in the first panel of the day, right? We don't have 10 years, 20 years, right, to make Europe competitive again. But we do have a few things, right? I mean, if you look at today, I mean, I'll take the German market, which obviously we're front and center on, but the German market today, you typically got a German investor will hold 10 to 11% of a German stock versus 40% will be held by Americans, right? It's the flip in the US. Well, why is that? Well, today, if you look, actually, by the way, and I would probably speak for all of us, some of our biggest volume stocks are not European, they're American, right? They run across our platforms on a day-to-day basis. But why is that, right? Well, one reason, obviously, they've got very deep pools. They've got, super sexy stocks, the big seven, right? Very, very, very incentivized in terms of capital growth and opportunity. But there is zero incentivization in Europe for investors to invest in Europe, right? There's differentiation between tax regimes, whether it's fixed income or equity, right? There are irregular pension schemes. We don't have, the ability in certain markets, even in a state pension scheme, to invest into equities at all, zero, right? So there is something that regulation can do for us in the short term, which is really put the turbo on introducing some standards around pension schemes in Europe, investment schemes, doesn't need to be pension schemes, that may scare off some of the younger generation, right? But investment schemes that are focused on investing in Europe and give incentives to invest in Europe, right? And we can do that pretty quickly if we really wanted to.
So a pause, standards, not regulation. Peter, do you agree with that?
Yeah, I would, for regulation, I would say a bit different. Not that I disagree, but if you look at regulation in the US, I mean, regulation will be killed. Yeah? Let's put it this way for a number of things. Going back to 25% of administration, the same will apply for regulation. Whether it will happen, that's something else, but it will go in that direction. I think Europe can be smart because you know what it means. There will be a lot going on the first 4 years and then accidents will happen. You're not going to tell me that there will not be any collateral damage after 4 or 5 years, and even worse, maybe systemic damage. But what is the wise thing to do is, and I wrote down a few words, it's focus with your regulation on the new things. Don't repeat or refine the existing ones, because they are more or less fine and they are stable. Second one, go back to more principle-based. Because when you go rule-based, you're defining rules for a certain solution. And what we need is innovation. We need to leave room for finding solutions. We don't have to tell how it needs to be done. Yeah, we need to say what is the intent. What do you want to do with safety, resilience, all these things, without going into the rules. We are going into the details. We're putting us on the ground, and we don't see what's happening above us. And that's from a previous risk manager. And then proportionate. They need to be proportionate. I think that's very relevant because there are a number of situations where it's different, and give that room for sandboxing, because that is giving you somewhere the freedom to play. And gaming is very popular now. The freedom to play is also with the new technology a way to find ways. So you also stimulate that way a kind of a new capability, a new skill that people need to have. So smart regulation would combine in one way or another these ones, and then focusing on the right topics. Yeah, with this, focusing on the right topics, and then I think we're going in the right direction.
Super. Olga, I'd like to add a sort of bonus question for you as well, which is, if we streamline regulations in this kind of way, does it also make sense to streamline the regulators?
Sorry?
To streamline the regulators.
Yes, exactly. That was actually going to be my point. Because if we're saying that, or if people are saying that we're too fragmented, so are our regulators. And what we're seeing, and I've seen that across our 4 CSDs, that you have the same regulation, but you have very different interpretations by the regulators of the same regulators. So I think there is also a need for this to work, and I don't disagree with anything that's been said. I think if we talk about simplification, that it's also part of simplification, the pausing, the focusing on the right things, and so on. So that all of that is going to would allow us to move faster and we don't have 20 years, we don't have 10 years, we need to go fast. So yeah, streamlining and I won't say consolidating the regulators, because that's probably one step too far, but actually get to a same understanding, whether that is through single supervision or converging supervision. I mean, there are probably different ways of getting there, but getting our supervisors together with us to help us move forward rather than hold us back or have different views of the same regulation, that would also definitely be a step in the right direction.
Super. Dimitri, do you have a different perspective?
Not much, actually, but we have conversions, we have, centralization, now we have streamlining. It all goes the same direction. No, just coincidentally, I fell back on a small video from a conference that took place in 2011. So in 2011, I think, Mark, you were there. It was in the conference area of the Frankfurt airport. It was settlement beyond 2020.
Oh.
And you may remember at that point in time, I remember that was, if you type it in YouTube, you will find it. There was a question on, it was in 2011, so by 2020, how many CSDs do we have in Europe? And I recall very well, I was in the room, that it was ranging between 2 and 50. So we were not so wrong with 30
No,
something.
it's very accurate.
No. But what I recall as well, and I know it was, but I will not give the name anymore. I mean, in the panel, every panelist had the opportunity to bring one slide. And one of the panelists brought one slide with, a very simple Excel graph, number of CSDs and the number of regulators. And there was more regulators than CSDs in Europe. And that was very, very provocative at that point in time. But I believe that today now the agenda, it's again, on the agenda. But by the way, everyone is in the room here is quite upset, I believe, about the page 61 of the report of Mr. Draghi, where we talk about one CSD, one CCP. But in the very same report, there is also a reference to the need for more, I will even dare to say, centralized supervision.
There is
and I think if we are honest with ourselves, and if we want to really behave as a team Europe, like everyone is part of the team, it's not that the regulators or the supervision side would be playing another game. We are all playing, we belong to the same team. And if we are conscious of that, we should also be brave enough to figure out if we don't need to do better from that angle. Yeah.
Let me disagree a little bit with that, Dimitri. I think the consolidated supervision needs to fill the gaps, not substitute, in my opinion. The proximity, as you were mentioning, Olga, to the markets in equity is super important. How many notaries do we have in Europe? Do we need to consolidate all notaries into one notary? The notary function of CSD is super important. It's the proximity to the people, to know the company, so on and so forth. So to do that from a central point of view, from one single supervisor, I don't think that would create economies of scale. It would probably create these economies of scale in the CMU perspective. If we really want to be granular, if we really want to get to the SMEs and the retail and so on and so forth, the less proximity we get to markets, in my opinion, we lose the equity battle, not the fixed income. Fixed income is another story, but in equity, and I'm an equity guy, I think we lose the knowledge. We lose which company is this one, who are these people, and so on and so forth. I think that is super important in equity, to know the topic, the company, the space, so on and so forth. And I think it's a question of filling the gaps. What is really wrong in the supervision, rather than consolidate everything into one single? And I'm not a big fan of that. And if you allow me to use a football analogy, in the football that I used to like 20 years ago, the pitch was always with water and mud and so on and so forth. So only the muscle guys could play. And now all of a sudden Messi is possible. Messi is very small. But in the football of 20 years ago, he would have played 5 minutes. Meaning small, sometimes, if the pitch is right, if we make everybody play with the same rules, then there's a possibility for small CSDs or small supervisors to do their job, provided that this is not, as you very rightly mentioned, creating these economies of scale in terms of the supervision is different. The supervision cannot be different. And that's where I to some extent, also disagree with you in the principle thing, because the principle thing, I understand the benefits of that, but that led us in the past to gold plating. So directives were okay, but to some extent it created competition among regulation between the different. So maybe we've gone too far, and I would agree totally with you in terms of you need to do this like this, and so you switch on the light before. So this kind of super detailed technical standards. But if we go to principles again, we probably rewrite the history of competition among rules between the different countries and gold plating in directives. This is a little bit my experience.
And single supervision cannot be another layer.
It can't be additive.
I mean, I don't think we want that.
I think it's always to be seen within the strategic intent. Yeah. So what do you want to achieve? Yeah.
absolutely get the priorities right. Now, we're close to the end of time. I'm going to give you each 20 seconds or 30 seconds to say what gives you the most hope. Dimitri.
Well, that was unexpected, but I can try
Yeah,
to
no, I
improvise.
didn't tell them this question in advance. So.
I'm not surprised, Mark. No, just I would like to bring one point, and it's what I don't remember in which panel, probably the one on new technologies. We are ahead of the curve in the new technologies. The work I will not try to arbitrate if what the ECB did was better than what the Swiss did. I don't know, I don't really care, because that's really the early stage anyway. We need to do much better. What gives hope is that if we play it well, new technologies could be, potentially very disruptive in terms of, processing, but in terms as well, in terms of, reshaping the landscape, redefining some roles and so on. But if we do it well, it's really something that looks promising. And that was 21 seconds, sorry, Mark.
Super. Indeed. Olga.
Try to do 20 seconds. So what gives me hope is I feel there's determination from all around. We agree on the objective, which is growth. And given that we agree on the objective, then maybe this time we'll be able to turn around all this complexity and this plumbing that we've built over years and turn it into a growth engine.
Wonderful. Peter.
I'm looking at 2045, and I'm looking at, I'm a dreamer. I'm a dreamer, so
we'll look it up on YouTube when we get there.
and I'm looking at what we could have at that moment of time. So, and if you look then at tokenization, DLT, so you can fractionize things. Then if you look at cloud computing, quantum computing, there is no limit anymore. So you can run models. And then you have artificial intelligence, can build the intelligence in the models. Then everything is there to go to atomic settlement, and the whole liquidity problem is solved because you push everything through a line with a few millions, because you fractionize everything, you put the pressure, like to say it in physics, so high that it will go through it enormously fast. The computing power will be there, and if the circumstances change, artificial intelligence will help us to adapt the model. 2045. Let's make that.
I'm just wondering if that's Peter speaking or the artificial intelligence speaking. But anyway, so I'm going to come back to growth because I'm really, really passionate about this growth, right? Mark and I had a statistic last Friday. I think Mark heard it, but I certainly heard it because I was heading the panel, which I was quite flabbergasted about. Since 2019, the number of retail depots, so safekeeping accounts for retail customers in Germany, has gone from 20 million to 35 million. 35 million, right? So that's less than 5 years. So you are seeing a enormous growth in the retail sector. The youth of today, and I speak from my eldest child, who is only 19, who has 4 accounts, 3 of them with safekeeping accounts, right? Not because of me. But the reality is today, the access to being able to transact, trade in various asset classes, across whatever platform you want to do, and the ability to set them an account within hours, not days or weeks or months, right, is definitely there. Our job now is to make sure we harness that in Europe, and we make sure we capture that growth.
Excellent. Javier, what makes you optimistic?
T2S makes me optimistic.
Good. Whoa. You weren't expecting that, Dimitri.
I think it's a great basis for growth. I think it's a great basis to make things happen. It was promised to us, to most of us, that with one single account, we will be able to hold Europe in T2S. Let's make that happen. And then we have competition, then we have harmonization, then maybe fragmentation is not an issue. If we really make that goal of target to securities from the outset real in the next years, I think we make a definitive change in how people would and politicians would look into post-trade. And honestly, I hope that the Draghi report, or everything I said, I'm not against the Draghi report. I've been dragged into the report. there are many positive things there, and I really hope that the priorities are clear and they are really put in the right order. Otherwise, if we get into just yet another debate, it will never lead us to anything. That's my hope.
Fantastic. I think you've been a great panel. We've got real visions for the future, and we've all got cause to be optimistic in the light of the very real and very imminent challenges that we face. So a big hand for the panel. Thank you very much.